when you think of mushrooms, you're going to fall into one of these three categories. The first one being thinking about hallucinogenic or psychedelic drugs. The second group being enjoying mushrooms in your food as a delicacy. And finally, you have the group whereby mushrooms are dangerous and poisonous and you should avoid it by all costs. Now, in ancient Egypt, it was considered a food for the royalty. In China, since the Han Dynasty, many health benefits of mushrooms were seen, including that of spirituality and as well as longevity. And the Aztecs actually used it for religious ceremonies. There was a very small study whereby they looked at individuals, and there were really only 4 people in that study, where they had shingles, and it sort of reduce the progression of the shingles. Now, personally, I've been using it for about 2 years right now. I was using it for sleep to see whether it actually helped, and I did find the benefit of actually initiating sleep, and therefore it can improve stamina, which is quite interesting because there was a lot of controversy in the 1993 Olympics, especially the Chinese athletes, where they were really crushing it and they were tested for performance-enhancing drugs and steroids. And what they found was they weren't actually taking any steroids, but they were actually taking Cordyceps. But despite not having a lot of clinical studies, I did find a study whereby it was used as an adjunct with chemotherapeutic drugs, and there were about 373 participants, and they felt that it helped with tumor regression. But again, we need a lot more studies before we start making claims about helping with cancer, and therefore I would really take it with a grain of salt. Welcome back to Peak Performance Hacks, where we dive into the secrets of optimizing your health and performance, and I'm your host, Dr. Gan. Today we're going to be exploring a fascinating and ancient remedy that's making a significant comeback in modern times, and that is medicinal mushrooms. Now, just to set the record straight, and as my disclaimer, none of this is medical advice, and it's purely my views and opinions based on the research that I found. I'm going to bet that for most people, when you think of mushrooms, you're going to fall into one of these three categories. The first one being thinking about hallucinogenic or psychedelic drugs. Think about the hippie movement in the 70s. The second group being enjoying mushrooms in your food as a delicacy. And finally, you have the group whereby mushrooms are dangerous and poisonous and you should avoid it by all costs. And essentially, I think that's been drilled into most of us since we've been young. My focus really today is looking at the other benefits of mushrooms, especially when used as a supplement or a tonic, rather than the psychedelic element, which is actually quite important today because there's a significant amount of research to suggest that psychedelics can actually help with mental health, but potentially that's a video on its own. Now, in order for us to understand mushrooms, we have to look at the history of them. Now, in ancient Egypt, it was considered a food for the royalty. In China, since the Han Dynasty, many health benefits of mushrooms were seen, including that of spirituality and as well as longevity. And the Aztecs actually used it for religious ceremonies. Now, to give you context, if you've ever had penicillin, which is an antibiotic, provided you're not allergic to it, this is actually derived from a mushroom, penicillin. Now, mushrooms have been studied for years in mycology, and research kind of hit a standstill in the 70s as a result of the hippie movement and using psilocybin as a psychedelic, which eventually became a Schedule 1 drug. However, in Asia, the interest for mushrooms and also its use in traditional Chinese medicine has continued. Now, if you look at mushrooms, it can be sort of broken down into 3 categories. The first one would be using it for nutritional benefits. The next would be medicinal benefits. And finally, it can be used as a supplement or a tonic. Now, I will be looking into more the tonic and supplement side rather than the medicinal and nutritional, even though there's a little bit of crossover when you look at mushrooms, especially with these claimed benefits out there. So the mushrooms that I'll be looking at, and I'm essentially going to be using their known names rather than their scientific names because it's going to make it a lot easier for everyone, including myself. Now, the first mushroom we're going to be talking about is reishi, and this has been used in traditional Chinese medicine for years and is considered to increase immunity as well as longevity. Most of these studies are actually laboratory or preclinical, and some of them have been done in animal studies as well. So I really believe that we need stronger studies done in humans before we can actually look at these health claims, especially those that are made about certain cancers. Now, it can be found in a powder form, a tonic, or even a capsule. And we did mention that there's this anti-cancer component. But despite not having a lot of clinical studies, I did find a study whereby it was used as an adjunct with chemotherapeutic drugs, and there were about 373 participants, and they felt that it helped with tumor regression. But again, we need a lot more studies before we start making claims about helping with cancer, and therefore I would really take it with a grain of salt. Now, there are other uses specifically for immunity by reducing replication of viruses when you have a viral infection. There was a very small study whereby they looked at individuals, and there were really only 4 people in that study, where they had shingles, and it sort of reduced the progression of the shingles. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I think we definitely need more studies before we start making claims about helping with viruses and improving immunity. Now, personally, I've been using it for about 2 years right now. I was using it for sleep to see whether it actually helped. And I did find the benefit of actually initiating sleep. Not that I had an issue with initiating sleep, but I found that it actually benefited me in that way. I was looking for sort of getting more into deep sleep. And again, it's really hard to tell because it really depends on how your day is and all the other factors, including how hard you push yourself, your stress levels, and also what's going on in your day-to-day life. So when it comes down to immunity, I don't think it's as beneficial as they make it out to be, but it's something that you should consider as well. Now, it does have side effects such as nausea, gastric upset, or even diarrhea. So it is something that you have to note, especially if you're taking it for the first time. The only other thing I would say is that when I spoke to different people that used it, they found it didn't actually help with their sleep, but it did help with sort of getting them into a relaxed state. And for some of them who were actually meditating, they felt that it actually improved their meditation. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it is a very subjective experience. So you need to take that into consideration if you decide to use it as a supplement. Now, the next mushroom we're going to be looking at is lion's mane. And this is a mushroom that gets its name by its appearance. It's got long, wide, dangling spines, and it essentially looks like a lion's mane. Now, most of the studies here done are laboratory or done in animals. And so it's really hard to use this evidence as concrete based on the wellness claims that is made out. And it's been used in traditional Chinese medicine for a very long time, and specifically to help with stress reduction and also anxiety reduction. They've also looked at it in terms of whether it can help in performance and brain cognition. And I did actually find a pilot study whereby they used young individuals under 45 and did find some benefits in terms of their performance. But again, it was a very small study, so it's really hard to make a judgment call on that. There have been mice studies whereby they stimulate nerve growth factor after injury to help in cognition. But again, this is an animal study and it hasn't been done in humans as well. Now, the claims that come out of this include improving cognition, relaxing you, and also helping with sleep. And these are some of the claims specifically made in traditional Chinese medicine. The side effects include discomfort in your tummy, diarrhea, nausea, and there has been a major issues with liver toxicity. So it's something that you have to watch, especially when you're taking larger amounts. My view, based on me actually using it as well for the last few years, is I do really believe it helps with sleep. At least for me, it does. I've never had issues, again, falling asleep, but I did find it initiates sleep. So within 30 minutes, you kind of feel sleepier and you actually want to get into sleep. And personally, I kind of felt I went into a deeper sleep immediately rather than going into sleep and then waking up multiple times. But again, this is subjective because this is exactly what I experienced. Now, in terms of the long-term brain improvement, I think this is one that it's really hard to, or very difficult to put out because it really depends on your lifestyle factors. And it's also a long term game. So I think this is very hard to tell. Now, the next mushroom I'm looking at is Cordyceps. Now, this has been around for a very long time, especially in Asia, where it's been used for multiple purposes. And in Latin, essentially, it means clubhead because that's what it looks like. There are about 500 different species. And the commonest ones that I'll be looking into is Cordyceps sinensis or sinensis, not sure if I'm not saying that right, and Cordyceps militaris. Now, in terms of what people use it for, it's pretty similar to what others have used for reishi. They talk about antioxidant effects, anti-inflammatory effects, and even anti-cancer, which kind of floats around. Now, it helps reduce fatigue, diabetes, and even heart health and arrhythmias. The other benefits include increasing energy in your cells, especially ATP, and therefore it can improve stamina, which is quite interesting because there was a lot of controversy in the 1993 Olympics, especially the Chinese athletes, where they were really crushing it and they were tested for performance enhancing drugs and steroids. And what they found was they weren't actually taking any steroids, but they were actually taking cordyceps. And from what I found from the data out there is that it actually isn't a banned substance. And I think that right now it's still used in sports as well. Now, again, similarly as what I mentioned with the other mushrooms, I don't think there's enough evidence to support it, especially when it comes down to the anti-cancer part. My view is it's really hard to tell at the moment, and it really depends how you feel from day to day. And I think when you've had a hard day or if you've exercised hard, you haven't had enough recovery, you've had a big day at work, all these are factors that can kind of skew the results that you may be looking for. And so it'd be hard to actually tell whether has this made a difference. So in my view, I think I'm a little bit neutral with this. Could it be helping? Maybe, but it's hard to tell. The next mushroom I'm talking about is chaga, and this is a parasite mushroom that grows off tree trunks. It has been seen all over the world, especially in cooler climates, and traditionally is used for ceremonies and also for healing and an entire myriad of conditions, especially in traditional medicine. Now, I would almost say that if you had any condition that you put out there, they would say chaga would help with it because essentially it covers everything that you can think about, from infections to liver issues to diabetes to GI disorders to even cancers that sort of pop up here and there. Again, the studies have not been completely proven for most of the benefits that they're claiming here, especially in isolation. And the studies are quite small. Now, again, my view falls similar to cordyceps and all the other mushrooms. I'm not really sure whether it's actually helping or not. And it's one of those things that, similarly to supplements, I would say, you might not see the benefits immediately and it may be a long-term thing, but obviously you're consuming it over a period of time. Now, the other mentions that I'm not going to talk about here are turkey tail, shiitake, and maitake, which are other mushrooms, and they have other claims to them. So what do I gather from the data and the research that I've done, including my personal experience, which again is quite subjective? Mushrooms have been around for a very long time. Ancient and traditional medicine and rituals have been around for much longer than modern medicine has been around. Could some of the things being claimed here be a placebo effect? Certainly. Do we need more robust studies? 100%. Are there benefits despite the fact that the other points may be true? Definitely for the person who believes in what they're taking and also the results that they're actually seeing. So again, there's a huge subjective experience here, but no matter what anyone says, this subjective experience is real. And especially in medicine, when people believe in what they're taking and they believe they're actually seeing a result, no matter what any evidence tells them, they will continue to take it. But similar to supplements, I believe using mushrooms as tonics may benefit you, but I've often believed in this, and you probably heard me say it in all the other rants that I've had in the episodes, is that rather than spending your money on mushrooms or even supplements, it would be better for you to actually focus on the simple basics that make a huge difference in your life. And this could include managing your stress, your nutrition, your exercise, and even doing mindfulness practices, which will actually take you a lot further. But if you're someone who has already done that and you're looking for a little bit of an edge, I believe mushrooms may give you that edge. Now, personally, for me, from the perspective of sleep, I have felt that it has helped me. Now, with the other claims that they mention, I'm not quite sure that that may be true. And sometimes the placebo effect may be exactly what is happening. This wraps up this episode of Peak Performance Hacks. All the links and resources are in the video description or in the resource section, whether it is on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, please consider subscribing. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a review so that more people can discover our podcast and it could benefit them as well. Until I catch you next time, speak soon.